Hey, welcome everyone to Your Bible Questions Answered. My name is Dr. Douglas Hamp. I am taking your Bible questions. If you want to give a question, put something in, I would be happy to take it. You can get the Way Congregation app. That's the best and easiest way. And during the week, when you're thinking about that question, you can just pop it right in there. Just go to the messaging section of the app, put your question in, and I'll get to it. Or you can add it right now during the show. You can do it live and put your question in there, and I will do my very best to get to it. All right, now if you want to help take care of this program, more than just give your questions, you can also sew into this. I do a show on Tuesdays. This show right here. And then I also do one on Thursdays, which is Prophecy Roundtable. We have a lot of fun there. And then every Saturday, every Shabbat, I do a teaching at the Way congregation. So you are invited to come to all three of those. If you want to sew into those, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp and you can give as little or as much as you want. So thank you to all my patrons who are already doing that. Well, let's jump into the questions for today because there are some great ones as usual. Just some wonderful questions. So let's get started. All right, our first question is coming from Diana. She says, "What is a throne angelically speaking?" Well, Diana, we only get glimpses of what is going on. We're told that there are powers, thrones, and principalities. Essentially, there's some kind of hierarchy in the angelic realm, right? So they don't all have the same position. In fact, when Gabriel was coming to Daniel to explain, what was going on, it says that he couldn't get through because he was being stopped by a prince of Persia. In fact, it wasn't actually Gabriel, so let me just take that back. But it was some unknown angel, and he said that he was withstood by the prince of Persia for 21 days. So there's principalities, right? So you're a prince of a certain area, a certain region. These angelic beings sit on some kind of throne. They have, and it may not be that they sit, right? I mean, who knows if they're sitting or not? Do they need to sit? I don't know. Does God need to sit? No, but he seems to sit on a throne. But certainly that throne is a representation of the realm that they rule over. Okay, so whether they have a physical throne or however that works, they occupy a place of authority, a place of kingdom, and that's really what we're trying to get at here. So that is essentially what a throne, angelically speaking, is. Okay. Sean asks, "Hello, Pastor Doug. I've been doing some surface study of the Hebrew, and I'm confused about the Aleph. I do not know Hebrew and have no background in it, other than what little I have been able to teach myself about the language. But how is the Aleph not a vowel? I understand that the Hebrew alphabet is 22 consonants, but the Aleph is the A, or is it, right? How is it that it is not a vowel? Understand that I'm totally ignorant in the Hebrew language, but I'm confused as to how it isn't a vowel. Can you please explain?" Well, yeah, Sean, the beautiful thing about Hebrew is that you have a number of um you have essentially five vowels in modern Hebrew, probably back in biblical Hebrew, certainly Mishnaic Hebrew, you had seven vowels. And as you go back further and further, you probably had fewer vowels. In early biblical Hebrew, you probably had about three vowels, and then it became five. And then by the time we get to Mishnaic Hebrew, on to the the later times, then you have probably up to seven different vowels. Okay, so you have a, e, o, u, plus maybe a couple others. All right, so that being said, how do you express those vowels in Hebrew? Well, there are rules that govern it so that you can look at a word. You're like, oh, I know that this is a and that's an a and that's an o. But the letter Aleph is sometimes used in place where any other rule wouldn't make sense, and that it becomes a marker for this spot in the letter, and then in the three root word, which most words in Hebrew contain three root letters. One of those root letters can be an aleph. All right. Now, the aleph does not have its own sound, it's only a placeholder for a particular vowel. Okay. Most often, I won't say always. Okay. In fact, probably shouldn't say most, but let's say frequently, that vowel can be an ah. Okay. But sometimes it can be an o. Sometimes it can be an u. Sometimes it can be an a. So it really can take on those different vowels, and the rules of grammar explain which one it's going to be. Now, there's another vowel that is akin to the aleph, which is the letter ein. Now, the ein is something that you do back in your throat. So kind of that feeling like where you're about to throw up, that's where the ein is. It's what we call a guttural. So ein. So Yeshua, right? There's that ein there. And there are guys that can sound even way better than I can. I think I do it okay, but Arabs really pronounce their eins amazing. Okay. By and large, most Israelis are not pronouncing the letter ein nowadays. And so they always have to say, how do you spell that? Is it with an aleph or is it with an ein? Okay. Because they don't hear the distinction. They don't pronounce the distinction. Okay. So that being said, the ayin can act in a way very similar to the aleph, but the quality of the ayin, at least historically speaking, unless you're an Arab, then it will be a guttural. Okay, so the aleph and the ayin were at one time they were very distinctive. Nowadays, that distinction has largely been lost, but both of those letters are essentially placeholders within the three root system for, hey, this letter is basically going to be a vowel. Okay. So I know that's a little bit abstract. It would be much easier to show you on a chalkboard or a whiteboard or something like that. But as you continue to study Hebrew, I hope that at least gives you something to think about and something to work with. And I wish you the very, very best in your studies. All right. Diana asks, Ehud and the king Eglon. She says, every time I read this account, I feel like there is something in the wording that implies that the king may have had some homosexual expectations regarding the nature of the gift Ehud was bringing, the way the guards and servants were sent away, and what they assumed was happening when finally they entered and found the king dead. Did Ehud trick the king with an implied conjugal liaison? Diana, I don't know. I think that's entirely plausible. I don't know if we can prove that. Um, but it would not surprise me. There were a lot of odd things happening in those days, and I don't think that's out of the question. We got to be careful, of course, to not read into the text. So I would want to see some explanation or something in the text that would actually suggest that. But I think it's at least plausible what you're suggesting. All right, Mark asks, after binge watching this series, I've learned so much about the new covenant and so much more. My question is, why did Jesus die? Was it to be a propitiation for our sins, or was it to establish a new covenant because of the marriage law in Deuteronomy 24, or are they working in conjunction? Well, Mark, I have a teaching called Why Did Jesus Die? Okay, and I would encourage you to watch that. There is essentially 5 things that happened at the cross, and it's to understand what happened at the beginning. First of all, God and the world, this whole cosmos, were in perfect harmony with one another. We know that God came walking in the cool of the evening, and that was normal, right? There was no corruption, no decay, no degeneration. So there was no problem at all. Of course, then Adam and Eve ate that proverbial fruit, and death entered in. And it was at that point that the of course, death itself entered in not only to Adam, but also into the world. Remember, Adam comes from Adamah. So what happened to the earth man happened to the earth. We read about that in Romans chapter 20, that the expectation of the creation eagerly is waiting for the revealing of the sons of God. Right. So when the sons of God are revealed, then the earth, the creation, is going to be liberated from the corruption of bondage, or the bondage of corruption, and into the glorious liberty of the sons of God. So the very corruption is in the corruption is in the very earth itself. It's in the very rocks. It's in the trees. It's in the grass. It's in everything. We call that entropy. Second law of thermodynamics. That is that principle of death that entered in at the fall of man. Okay, and so that is going to be restored when the Lord comes back. It's going to be restored. So that's one of the things that the cross took care of, is the restoration of the very planet itself. Of course, then you have death in all of humanity, not just me or just you, but all of humanity. We all have the principle of death, degeneration, decay, entropy in our very cells, in our DNA. We're falling apart. Okay. And so the Lord is going to restore that as well. He's going to fix that. Then there is the relationship between God and Israel, and that had to be restored as well. Okay, and so that was taken care of at the cross. So you have all these different things that got broken at the fall, and all of those had to be restored, and they were all sponsored by the blood of Yeshua on the cross. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. I encourage you to watch that teaching. Why did Jesus have to die? All right, so it's right here on my YouTube channel. Just put that in. Maybe put my name in there as well, and it should come right up. Why did Jesus have to die? It's a fascinating question, and I thought it was fascinating as well. And so I really dove into that. And I have really cool graphics and all that. Well, I have mediocre graphics, in my opinion, but they at least help you to understand what's going on there. All right. Chris asks, how did haruspex work? So haruspex is a really interesting word, Chris. And that is one that I spent some time on in Corrupting the Image, Volume 2. But it's made up of two words. Specs, of course, is the word to see. That comes from Latin. So like spectacles. And then the word haru, where is that coming from? Well, this is a word that was imported into Italy from where? From Babylonia, from the Mesopotamian era. This is a Sumerian word. Haru means liver. Okay, and so this was actually brought into the Italian peninsula, and this became a profession, a haruspec, somebody who looked at livers. All right, well, how did it work, you ask? Well, that's of course where, you know, I can't tell you exactly. I can tell you what they did, but how they did it, that I don't know the art, and I don't think I really want to know. But the basic idea behind a liver sear was that they would, of course, kill the animal. They would take out the liver. They would cut it in half, and then they could look at the various rings and formations, and look at what was happening in there. It's kind of similar like a palm reader, right? Somebody can look at your palm and say, oh, I can tell your future based on the lines in your palm or something like that. It's the same basic idea, is that somebody could look at a liver and say, oh, I know what's going to happen. Now, I think it's all just uh, charlatanism. Okay, I think there's nothing more, that it was just a big con. But people certainly believed in that, and as long as you can keep the con going, you can keep this charade going, then I guess you get to keep your job. The trouble is, if you came up with a pronouncement that was utterly wrong, then you might lose your job and you might lose your head too. So, they had to be quite careful. Now, it's entirely possible that it was more than what I'm giving it. I think it was just all a charade. Could there have been something that was actually happening in the spiritual realm, a very dark spiritual realm, I might add? Well, I think that's at least plausible. We know that Satan and his goons were doing real stuff, and maybe they were somehow able to influence what was happening within that liver. Now, that's not to say that Satan knows the future, but he can certainly affect the future. So there could have been something that was going on that I am not privy to because I've never taken up that profession, and I don't know, how reliable their connection with the dark arts truly were, and with the dark realm. That's just a difficult one to say, and I can't say more than what I'm telling you right now. But that is the basic um, philosophy, the basic idea behind that, and I hope that helps. So thanks for a cool question. So Diana says, just taking this for a walk after reading several versions, translations of Exodus 34:7 and Numbers 14:8. I think there may be another explanation that I hadn't considered nor heard anyone propose. Could this be saying, properly worded in 21st century sentence structure, the following: the Lord is long suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. In other words, by no means clearing the guilty, being parenthetically guilty, added by contextual implication. So might it be actually saying, don't get me wrong, he by no means clears guilty, but neither by no means does he punish generations of those children, of those that hate him. This makes me rethink what I know of epigenetics and generational curses, but does not contradict what we know about them. We are accountable for our actions and covenants we impose upon future generations, but we cannot blame God for that. He doesn't curse people. People and fallen entities curse people. Am I making sense? Lol. Thoughts? Um, yeah. So Dana, I love your questions. They're so wonderful and thought provoking. Um, I've kind of thought something along the similar lines, that it's not so much that God's like, I'm going to get you until the third and fourth generation. Rather, I think that he's limiting the effects of a particular sin to the third and maybe the fourth generation. What's the difference? I don't know. That's sort of a God domain. But the bad decisions that I make will indeed affect my children, and will probably affect their children, and possibly could affect the next generation after that. But then after that, the those effects will in some way be mitigated. Now, sometimes, as you're speaking of epigenetics, I definitely am thinking along the same lines. So they've actually proven that fruit flies that are conditioned to um, endure longer in the cold, they pass on that quality epigenetically. They pass on that quality to the 13th, or maybe it's the 14th generation, right? So they're able to acquire something and then pass that on. So this would suggest that the great grandchildren of an alcoholic will not be affected by that, but the second, third, and maybe the fourth generations quite possibly will, right? So the decisions that we make, especially before having children, can be passed on, both good and bad, mind you. So I think that is really what God is getting at, and I love that you're thinking that way as well. So keep it up. Carol asks, what is your understanding on the rich man and Lazarus? I've heard teachers say it's talking about where our souls go before resurrection. My opinion is that we sleep at death until the resurrection. Otherwise, it would mean that we are judged at death, which I can't see taught in the Bible many things. Carol, I agree with you, and I've wrestled with that passage as well. So that's Luke 16. I tend to think that Jesus was telling a parable right there. The whole point here, we have this rich man and we have Lazarus. Okay, where did this story come from? Well, it was with the Pharisees, who really had this teaching that if you were rich, well, certainly you were enjoying God's blessing. And I think Jesus was trying to turn that whole thing on its head. Here you have this rich man, and then you have, is it Lazarus or is it Elazar, right? That's what it is in Hebrew. What does Elazar mean? It means God helps. So maybe it's more about the rich man and then the man that God helps. And the man that God helps was actually quite poor in this lifetime. So if that is indeed the correct interpretation, I think what Jesus was trying to say is, you guys, namely the Pharisees, have this teaching that if you have money, clearly you have God's blessing. If you don't have money, then clearly you don't have God's blessing. And I think Jesus was trying to turn that very idea on its head, because it just isn't the way it is. And so he was showing that the rich man, who they thought was going to have all the blessings and all the good times, is actually going to go to the bad place. So, um, yeah, I would take that probably as a parable. I would agree with you that I tend to think that we sleep at death, and the beautiful thing about that is the moment you die, well, that's it. You're not thinking. There's nothing happening, and then when you're resurrected, boom, there you are. You're awake, and it's as if no time has passed. So that's how I understand it. And from the many other passages, I get the impression that's what's going on. Diana asks, how many Satans are there apart from Hasatan, aka Enlil? And are there as many Antichrists as there are Satans? And are these all synonymous? Well, I think when we're talking about the individual known as Hasatan, because it has the article, there it is, the adversary, I think there's only one Enlil, or one adversary. He seems to have a lot of minions that work with him or for him. These are also known as fallen angels. He's also known as the covering cherub in Ezekiel chapter 28. There's only one uh, individual, one being with that designation, but he has many fallen angels who work with him or maybe work for him. It is my opinion that demons and fallen angels are exactly the same thing. I think the evidence, linguistic evidence especially, points that those must be one and the same. The word daemonia is the Greek word for mighty ones. How do I say that in Hebrew? Elohim. Okay, and so we know that these spirits are sometimes called Elohim, sometimes they're called B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, but they're often referred to as Elohim, mighty ones, because that's what they are. Philo of Alexandria says that the beings that the Greek philosophers call demons, Moses calls angels. So, there we have some very clear evidence. The other suggestion that people have that demons are the spirits of disembodied Nephilim, they're deducing that from the book of Enoch, and I think their deduction is wrong. I just don't think that is at all the case. So I'd say there's only one Satan, aka Enlil. Now, the Antichrist part of this question, I think, if we use that with a small a, there are many Antichrists, many people who are against Christ, who ought to be in place of Christ. But, in the end times, there's going to be one that we call the beast, the little horn. He is known, in a more popular sense, he's known as the Antichrist. So we just have to clarify our terms a little bit. But I think there's many Antichrists with a small a, but there's only one Antichrist who is the ultimate fulfillment of what we see in Scripture. And again, he's never actually called the Antichrist, specifically called that. He's called the beast, the little horn, the man of sin, the son of perdition. These are all epithets for this individual who will come upon the scene. And I think there's only going to be one. Man, I hope there's only one of this particular individual. All right. Chris Walsh asks, hi, Pastor Doug, is Nergal from Revelation 9, 7 through 11, the same deity as mentioned in Habakkuk 3:3-5. Pestilence meaning reshef, finding a connection with the arrows of plague. Thanks. Chris, I would say no. I think the deity in Habakkuk 3:3-5 is in fact the Lord. It's Jesus who is coming. And boy, I can hardly wait. Let's take a look at the passage. I think that will help us the most so that we can just get a better sense of what's going on there. So let me pull up the Bible for us and we will take a look at this. All right. So Habakkuk 3:3-5, it says Eloah. That's an interesting name for God there. So God came from or comes from. Now, this is the New King James, but if we look at the New English translation, they say God comes from Teman. All right. Is it came or is it comes? Well, I think the New English translation gets it right. All right. So um, it says in Hebrew, Eloah miteman yavo. So this word right here is actually future tense. All right. So it could be, sort of a present tense with a future implication or just future. And that's how I would interpret that God will come or is coming from Teman, right? Um, the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. All right, so the his glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. This has to be God. There's no other one who that this could be. This is God. This is Jesus. Now, when he comes, oh my, watch out. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Before him went pestilence and fever, followed at his feet. All right, so when the Lord comes back, well, guess what? It's going to be crazy. Okay. And we see this in 2 Peter chapter 3, that when he comes back, what's going to happen? The heavens are going to recede like a scroll, right? Talks about that in there, and also Revelation chapter 6, that the elements are going to melt with fervent heat. It's going to be pretty crazy. All right. So, yeah, the Lord's going to come, and it's going to be a mess when he comes back. So, I think it has to be Jesus that is being talked about in that passage. Oh, let's see. My friend Ed says, "What's the difference between Yeshua's baptizing in John 3 and the baptism that we receive after the cross?" Now, Ed, that's not fair. That's not fair at all. He and I were talking about that today on the phone, so now he's throwing it back at me. Oh boy, oh boy, that's just not even fair. Um, yeah, thanks a lot. I'm gonna punt on this one. I'm gonna leave this for another day. All right, that's just not even nice. All right, Jonathan asks, do you feel there is credibility of equidistant letter sequences, such as every 50 letters in Genesis spells Torah? Did God put other hidden clues using ELS in the Torah? Jonathan, I am not at all impressed by ELS. This is also known as the Bible codes. I think most of it is bunk. I think you'll get lucky once in a while, but I'm just not impressed. Um, yeah, I'm just not. I've heard people give various explanations, and they try to show things, and they put it in a sort of tic-tac-toe fashion. And I think garbage in, garbage out. I think once in a while you get lucky. But they were talking about it was talking about the predicting the murder of Rabin years ago, and I think it's all quite nonsense, because you have to put in ad hoc numbers, and then you get ad hoc results, and you got to sort of read between the lines when you're looking at these things. But look, I think sometimes you can get lucky, and you can get different things out of the text. You're always going to get something out of the text, but to say that those were necessarily put there, eh, I'm just not inclined. I just don't think that's the case. So that's all I got. All right. Yes, CZ says, I'm excited for L.A. Marzulli on Prophecy Roundtable Thursday. Hey, me too. I'm very, very excited about that. And I'm really excited that you guys will get the Regenesis teaser or the Regenesis Code book. Okay, I'm going to show you guys the teaser right now. All right, and I hope that you will get the book. So before I take any more questions, we have a little commercial break. So hold on. All right, man, I'm just so excited about that. I can hardly wait till you guys are able to get the book. I have put it on YouTube so you guys can listen to it. It's me reading it. The version on Audible just came out, yesterday? So check that out as well. And August 4th is when the paperback and the Kindle versions come out. So be looking for those. It would be awesome if you guys would get the early pre-order. That really helps the algorithm to just bump it up and everything, and let people know, right? Check it out, read it, say something about it. It helps me so much. The goal and the prayer is for this to become a movie. So we'll get there, right? One day at a time, but we'll get there. And in the meantime, I think you're going to love the story because it's pretty awesome. So check it out. All right. CZ asks, is there a specific reason that anyone hung from a tree was considered cursed other than because that was a common punishment for severe crimes? Well, CZ, man, that's a great question. Other than the fact that God says anyone who's hung on a tree is cursed, um, well, yeah, it's a good question. That really is a great question. Um, you know, clearly, what is going on here? Are you cursed because you're put on it? Because so you're put on the tree and then you're cursed, or is it you're cursed and then you're put on the tree, right? Which one is it, cause and effect? Or is this correlation causation, right? Is one causing the other, or is there just a correlation? I would suggest that it's more correlation. The reason that you're hung on a tree is because you're cursed. The reason you're cursed is because you did something that you were told not to do. And when you crossed that line, you broke that commandment, you transgressed, you committed iniquity, whatever it may be. Let's say that you murder somebody. Well, then because you committed that crime, now you're cursed, right? The sentence is death, right? And so now you are cursed to death. And being hung up on a tree is part of that curse. So that's how I would understand it. It could be that I'm wrong, but that's how I would understand that. It's not so much that, you were okay until they put you on the tree and now suddenly, oh goodness, you're cursed. I think the reason you were put on the tree is because you're cursed, right? So it's sort of a horse and cart issue. So hope that helps. Let's see. David Jackson just finished Regenesis audiobook. Definitely see it as a mini series or film. Hey, amen. I am just so excited to hear that. All right. Mo Shomo says, what does it mean in Genesis 3:22 when it says man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil? How can God know evil since he is perfectly perfect? Great question. Well, why did God put that tree there in the first place? I think God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden because in order for man to become like God, which is the goal, man had to make a choice. Now, we know what choice Adam made, but he had another choice, an equally viable choice that was right before him, which was to not eat of the tree. You have to understand, this is the first time in all of human history that man, and mankind for that matter, but man specifically, Adam, the individual Adam, had to make a choice, right? He's put in a perfect scenario. He's made in God's image. He's made in God's likeness. But to really be like God, to truly be a volitional creature, requires that you have to make a choice. And, let's say that you're making the ultimate robot and you want this ultimate robot to really be your friend. You truly want it to love you. How do you do that? How do you make a robot to have volition? Well, you have to give it a choice. And you have to give it a choice that's a real choice, a real option to reject you as much as to accept you. And sadly, Adam chose to reject God by eating from the fruit instead of rejecting the option to eat the fruit. He could have said, you know what? I am not going to eat of that fruit. And I think God would have said, hey, look, man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now let him stretch out his hand, right? So God does know evil. What is evil? That's kind of the big question here. In Isaiah 65 and 66, it says, they did evil before me. They chose to do that in which I do not delight. So evil is not a force, it's a choice. Evil is a choice. It's a choice to do something that God does not delight in. That's what evil is. Choosing to do something God doesn't delight in. It's that simple. And so a lot of us do evil quite frequently. We choose to do things that God doesn't delight in. And so God gave an option to man to do something that God didn't delight in. God didn't want him to do that, but he gave him the option to do that thing. He made it possible for man to do that thing so that he could actually choose whether to do that thing or not to do that thing. We know the choice Adam made, but Adam had an equally um, viable choice, which was to not eat. And I think had Satan come in and said, hey, go eat that fruit. And Adam's like, no, I'm not gonna. I'm choosing not to eat it. Then God would have said, hey, look, he's become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now let him stretch out his hand and take from the tree of life and live forever. But of course, that didn't happen. So one of these days, we'll get it all fixed. All right, another one. Can someone please tell me where Doug is reading these questions from? Is he on a different site? Yeah, Mo, I can tell you they're coming from the app. Okay, so it's the Way Congregation app. You can get that in the Google and Apple Play stores, or the Google store and the Apple store, whatever. But you can get those, get that app right there, and you can put your questions in the app. Okay, so the Way Congregation is the name of the app. Laman Kaman says, do you take a Calvinistic predestination perspective of God's sovereignty? And if not, what do you do with Acts 13:48? So Laman, I think the whole Calvinistic predestination is nonsense. That is based on a very, very, very faulty understanding of Scripture. They have taken the corporate national predestination of God electing the nation of Israel, and then they've taken that out of the corporate setting and they've put it into the individualistic setting. Okay, now per your question, let's take a look at that. Acts 13:48. In fact, I wrote a paper some years ago because I was so off put by this whole Calvinistic thing. I was teaching theology at the time, and I really got sick of this Calvinistic stuff. So I wrote a paper, Why God Did Not Elect Calvinists. I don't think it made my Calvinist friends very, very, very happy about that. Okay. All right. So let's take a look here. Now, now when the Gentiles heard this, all right, Gentile, who's a Gentile? Someone who's not Jewish or someone of the nations. They were glad and glorified the word of the Lord, and as many as had been appointed to eternal life believed. All right, so titagmenoi, this is the word that's being used here. This is in the third person passive, and it's not necessarily that God has appointed them, but this is also what we call a middle voice. All right, so that they had the option here to basically include themselves. All right. And so, really, this has to do with the Greek grammar and not so much with God appointing. You get to be in and you get to be out. That whole idea is utterly pagan. And I think when it comes to Calvinism, I think Calvinism is a terrible heretical doctrine. I'll even use that strong word there. I think it's a heretical doctrine, and in my humble opinion, I think Calvinism is as dangerous as being a Jehovah's Witness because of what they do with this idea of some people being chosen in and some people being chosen out or just left unchosen. Okay. So that's just that's a Greek grammar thing. It's it's the middle voice, those who decided to, who in a sense had appointed themselves, they believed. All right. So there you go. Let's see. I just did that question. Okay. Mo, it's from the Way Congregation app. Very cool. I got a lull from Ed. Very cool. All right. Let's see. Very good. Awesome, guys. Man, this is awesome. And just to let you know, I'm going to try to limit this program to about 45 or 50 minutes from here on out. So thank you, guys. Love your questions. Man, you're thinking. They're great questions. Again, if you want to become a patron of this, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give as little as $2 a month and up to whatever you want to give, 200, 2,000. No, I'm just joking. But hey, I'm not going to tell you what you to do. So it's up to you. But thank you for all my patrons out there. And make sure you get the book. Listen to the audiobook. You're going to love it. Get it on Kindle as well. And until next week or till this Thursday, I hope you will join me for a Prophecy Roundtable. I'll see you then. Until then, God bless you.